Well, hello and welcome back. Well, we're just walking in now to where the rock is that we looked at in the last of these videos. Thank you very much for the comments on the last one. It was a bit of a weird thing to throw out. People expected me to do stuff on sailing, but this is something of great interest to me, and I think a lot of people also share that kind of scratchy head kind of feeling when they look at these incredible things that people have built in history, only to be told, well, they just had lots of people and they made it happen. Because if you're involved in practical things and you have to problem solve things in the real world, there's a certain level of understanding you get to where you realize it doesn't matter how many people we get involved in a project, people alone is not going to be the thing that gets it over the line. So I started thinking about like the rock. In the comments last time, people were saying, oh, I thought you were going to move the rock and kind of be inspired about Egypt. The last thing we want to do right now is move this rock. Whilst it sits there, it's a talisman for thought. And I think the thing that we have got here, you're an individual sitting watching this, but once you connect with other people in the comments, we can have discourse backs and forwards and exchange ideas on like how people did this. People wrote in the comments last time they did it very fast and they left no evidence of their tools. I actually went one time, I think I was reading something by Graham Hancock, and I was living in London, and he was saying about there being marks on the back of these basalt sarcophagus, which is in the British Museum, that looked like a circular blade cut. And so I went literally that afternoon to the British Museum and started looking down the back of heavy Egyptian artifacts. And indeed, you could see marks that look like they're made by circular blades. I'm not saying they are, but I'm saying something made a mark on that rock that today we could quickly and easily make that similar mark by using a circular saw. So people are saying they were built fast. I can see where people are getting that idea from. I think on the other hand, we know that these things took decades to create, and that most likely, even if they had some kind of powered saws or huge numbers of people, it's just such a large task that we're looking at having to manage people over multiple years, which if you've lived in Boston and dealt with the Big Dig, another decades-long project / situation, you'll know how difficult it can be, and there's union issues and there's people out on strike for this and that, and then there's a closure, and then this is not happening because of the weather, and just trying to get these projects done by throwing lots of people at them, even throwing people and money at them, is not always the way that it gets through to a successful conclusion. So I started realizing that the best thing we can do with this rock is just kind of leave it here and contemplate the task that would be around this. Let's imagine that we came up here now as a work team and we want to start working on this little rock. And my initial idea was that we're just going to stand it upright. I think we should make it a little bit more complicated than that, because otherwise what we're going to do is dig a hole, use a very basic kind of balancing situation here, a bit of leverage, and we're going to get it upright and say, wow, now we know something about the Egyptians. We don't know anything about them. But look, if we take it from here and then we run it down to what's like this was an old logging road like years ago, we could place it here, right? It's going to nowhere, it's just going off into the trees. But look, imagine if this had been a road that you'd built, it's the Middle Ages or something, and you found a rock just next to the road that'd be great for a mile marker. Very common for me in the UK, these. So our work team is coming in and we're just going to place it here. Now, what would be the first thoughts that this team would have as they came in here? Firstly, each person on the team is going to want to know, what's the job? And they're going to want to know, am I getting paid? Or am I going to get beaten? Am I a slave? Am I going to get my food? I think the first thing that people coming in here and looking at this would be looking at is they would have some idea of how other jobs had gone that they've been involved in. This happens on work sites today as well, which is why people wear steel toe cap boots, which I have on here. Well, these are composite toe boots. I think people coming in and looking at this would be thinking of other things that happened in the past, which happens today as well, which is why we have impact resistant, cut resistant gloves. I think people coming in to look at this might be considering, I hope I don't get something in my eye from a lever breaking, a little splinter flying off. Again, something else that people have got a solution to these days. Obviously, safety squint can be engaged at any moment. That's probably pretty ancient as well. But if you go back to the Egyptian times, that's literally all they had. Safety squint, and then safety sandals, which we see in lots of stuff from India and the Philippines now, incredible craftsmen, but pressed into a situation where they don't have the proper safety equipment, and people getting terrible injuries to their hands. When I lived in China 20 years ago now, I was always very aware, and I lived like in the back of China, like 2 hours west of Shanghai. People I saw had a lot of injuries that had scarred up, and people had obviously been through the wars. Kids with burns, kids that had obviously been got involved with hot water. It's something that we have to recognize, is that people trying to do this work thousands of years ago, they got no health and safety. There's no medical insurance. There's no nationalized health. There's no anything like that which is going to help them afterwards. Even if you said, oh, they did have nationalized health, they could take days off to recuperate, great. There still wasn't anything to help them with infections, which would get into... I've lived again in Asia and been all through the jungles of Asia, and ended up on a number of occasions where I've got serious infections, down to the point that on one occasion in Hong Kong in '97, the doctor put a mark on my leg and said, if this was 30 years ago, we'd consider amputating your leg below this point for the risk of what's in there coming up to the rest of your body. As it was, massive load of ciprofloxacin, and we're all good. But that's not going to happen if you crushed your foot in Egypt. What happens next? Well, you've lost that person. And every time you lose a person in this situation, a new person has to be found, has to be equipped somehow with whatever's the equipment. They have to have accommodation found for them. They need to be trained to do the job. And if you're going to have anybody who gets up into the upper echelons where they actually have the skill to do really, really accurate stuff, which is what we're being told again, that people were able to complete these very complex tasks. Some of the inside edges at Puma Punko, like how on earth do you make that? People today with steel chisels question how it was done, but back in time or now, I guess you'd have to train up, right? They're not watching like Egyptian YouTube or Skillshare or something. They're going to have to learn it off other people. So if somebody gets injured, they are out the workforce. They are not able then to be part of what is going forward. All the training time that you've got into them is lost, and unless you're literally just casting them at the side of the road, their injuries, their needs are not being fulfilled. So you've got a slave nation of tens of thousands of people working for decades with no health and safety, with no medical catch net, and they have to come in and do this job. These are things that we should bear in mind, because these are the realities of doing this kind of work. So let's look at how they would consider doing this one. How would we do it today? Well, an excavator, a little mini excavator, can make its way up through here, even sneaking between these trees. The little ones can go through a 36-inch door, up through here, and then probably could grasp and kind of turn that by just dragging it, and get a rope onto the front of it, get it attached to the excavator, and we could drag it back using the traction abilities of the tracks on it to just drag it back through there. Ultimately, I could get my Land Rover and put it over there and bring the winch in here and attach it on. I got a 10,000 pound winch. I'm pretty sure I get that going. I could cut down a couple of these little trees and get them in front of it to make some kind of sled. Some of the rocks here would need moving out of the way. That's easy. Maybe got to cut that tree down now, but it's not very complicated. Let's go back a little bit further back. In this area in Nova Scotia, if we went back to the 1970s, oxen was still in very, very wide use there at that time in this area. And I think a lot of places around the world, again, where I've lived in the Philippines, in Thailand, in China, in Japan, people are still using heavy cattle like oxen to pull heavy loads. How much weight they can carry? Let me put some information in here. Let me show you what an oxen can carry. Right, so oxen can pull huge amounts of weight. You don't use horses so much. Their legs are too delicate. They're a fast-moving animal, and parts of the world obviously did not have horses when they blatantly had buffalo. So you could pull with buffalo, with water buffalo, with oxen, that kind of thing, and you could pull something like this down over here and get it into position over there. So could the Egyptians have used the modern technique with the excavator and the Land Rover? No. Could they use the one that's now 50 years old? Yes. They could get little trees and put them down, and they could get something on there, and they could pull it with an oxen, and they could pull it over here, and they could dig a hole with some shovels, and off you go. Now, Egyptians, did they have shovels? Probably not, but you can get a lot done with digging sticks, which is a technique which is still used now. If you're in the gardens around here, we have a lot of erratic boulders. This piece of land that we're on now is pretty, see, there's just rocks sticking out everywhere here, and we'll see this further up in the land where the there's another big rock here. This was all a big mess of moraines and the debris left over from glaciers going through here 10,000 years ago. The Laurentide glacier starts to melt, and as the glaciers melt off, they leave all these deep furrows in the ground, and they leave a lot of erratic boulders, which then as farmers came along a couple of hundred years ago, they had to start moving them out of the way. We're on a slightly different area of the property now, but this little collection of stones, which I've started to kind of hollow out a little bit into something. Basically, I've just taken a mound of stones that was here and I've dropped them back into a new shape, which is maybe we can put a roof on it or something, I don't know. But look at these massive rocks and see how rounded they are. This is granite that's been, it's not, is it called breccia, is it, where it's more like shattered rock? It's not that, it's things that have been rolled along and trained underneath glaciers. So when this was first inhabited, be about 1750, something like that, this part of the world, and at that time they needed to start clearing these areas out to have cattle in them, and it left a number of marks which we can still see on the land here. The main one being is once we move up into this area, get away from these, there's another load of rocks down there. Once we get up onto the contour, this area going through here, these trees are only about 50 years old maximum, no more than that. They're just 50 years old here. This would have been some kind of arable land. It's either been, you can normally tell by like how small the rocks are in those rock piles. If they're small, like down to fist size, then it was probably somewhere that had a crop. If they're larger rocks, then it's just somewhere that had hay on it. So what we've seen here is there are very small rocks in that area, which means that this was probably planted for some kind of crop. Now, over here, this area, these rocks haven't been removed. So it means when this was a field, this rock area was still somewhere that you had to plow around, and in it is this. You see here? These little round marks here are where this rock was split. And we'll see the project in just a second that it was probably going to. It was split by having a hard chisel and hammering the chisel and turning the chisel slowly as you're hammering it, and it would chip out the granite, which is what this is, down to a certain level. Then once you're in about that 4 or 5 inches, you then put in an insert and 2 metal feathers. We'll put some images up here now so you can see. And then when the center point is driven in, you drive it in all the way across the rock. You can split the rock and start to get something smaller that you can move, that you can use. Now, what were they using them for? Let's go and have a look up here. When we bought this piece of land, its history is kind of a bit cloaked. No one really knows. Everyone's around here is quite new to the area in terms of like these original constructions on the land. No one knows anything about them. It's just too far ago in history for anyone to remember. A bit like the pyramids, but I'm sure we could probably find some piece of record of how this was worked. This piece of land as well, also I have to work here, you know, working on the trees, managing the forest here. All the shapes that I'm making up here, these dead hedges, it's a way of clearing out all the detritus from the floor of the forest. We've had a lot of forest fires in Canada because the rules have changed and they're not able to sweep and clear the floors of these forests. And so this kind of stuff on the floor all through here, which I haven't got to yet, that is a tinderbox that just sends the fire on from tree to tree to tree, and that's what causes fire. So we have roads on 3 sides on this land, only a very little bit up here where there's actually forest connects to the land, the rest of it's a field. But I figured if I could clear as much of the forest floor as I could, this kind of stuff here, then I can make it safer and less likely to be affected if there are forest fires. So what were those guys splitting that rock for? They were splitting it to come here. These foundations are from a little house that probably was here between about 1750 and latest 1950. only because I can't find anybody that like knows the land before that time, and that's definitely when this was here. We did a little bit of investigation. My partner's uncle is an archaeologist, no, let me get this right, a geologist, and he came into this and immediately found a piece of brick, which I seem to have lost, but he found a piece of brick, which means there was probably a little brick chimney maybe in this central section. So you've got like one bay here and all the rocks have fallen in, and there's another bay over there where the rocks have somewhat fallen in, and then there's like a spur up the center. And what our thought is that that was designed to carry the weight of the range and the fireplace. So a simple dwelling. What's interesting here as well, and my partner Kat is her knowledge of like contracting work and renovating houses and all this kind of stuff is far beyond my own. I was curious about the fact that on this hillside here, you see this kind of like bulge outwards with the foundations in it, and then it kind of goes back onto the natural contour of the hill. Okay, did they dig this in with this? And she said no. What they did is they dug in a certain amount and started building, then they built the rest of the house, and then either had filled this in or backfilled it. And there's a drain, there's evidence here of this slightly depressed spot here going into now, that there's some kind of drain originally came out there to keep the cellar drained. And that what they were doing is, there's so many of these erratic boulders in the earth already, and so many tree roots and things, that if you can build on the edge of a slope like this, you could actually build the house and then back up around it to make the buttress, and then you don't have to deal with digging down through giant erratic boulders. You're putting the earth in. It's a fill situation rather than, you know, digging. So a smart move, a smart build here, but we can see all of these split rocks, right? Here's all these split rocks. Now this is how granite splits when you split it. You look down the side of there, like clearly the tolerance is about a finger thickness, you know, when on the other one, when it got to like just too big and too cracked, that one over there, maybe didn't show it too well, but the rock didn't split in a nice flat shape like this. It split all jagged and weird, and it wouldn't have been good for this application. So on here we can see in a couple of places where these rocks were split in their own way. Down here we think that there was steps here. There's a couple of kind of flattened rocks. Woo, a lot of leaves here at the moment. See these rocks under here? It looks like there's a bit of a staircase, and this way has been pushed out of position perhaps by this tree, but again we can see those little notches here where this one was split, and it wasn't a perfect split, but it was good enough to come in and be one of these foundation stones. So if we look at something again, you can see, look, the cut marks in here. So if we look at this guy here, or this one here, I think there's a couple of big ones laid in here. These are getting close to the size of the rock that we want to move over there, right? It's not very thick. In terms of weight, in terms of the complication of moving it, these are comparable. So how did these people do this? They had a heavy wooden sled, they had oxen, they levered the rocks up onto the sled, and then they oxen pulled it to position, and then they levered it off and rolled it down into here. Yeah, and there's no like question marks on this, because a lot of people know how this was done. A lot of renovation companies deal with this kind of stuff, and they understand how that happened. So between, you know, 5,000 years ago and the 1950s, to keep things round, people were pulling stuff with heavy animals. Maybe not in your neck of the woods, but out here where you can keep animals, and where you've got fields like this that need ploughing as well, and then the crop needs moving somewhere else as well. You need a sturdy animal that can pull things, that can move things. So with the right animals, we can pull quite heavy weights. And I think that fits in with the fact that as humans trying to move things, if we got into a situation where we're like levering things to try and make everything, oh, we're going to lever this, we're going to push it with our hands, you're immediately in a situation where you would recognize that you have no health and safety kind of safety belt around you, that you're immediately in a situation where if something comes down on your feet, if something comes down on your hands, if something goes in your eye, you're immediately heavily injured. This system of pulling things with animals is realistic and is basic, so we can start to take how much an oxen can pull as being like one unit. We need to look at like one unit of how people move things. We need to look at another unit of how animals move things. And then after that, there are no other things that can pull heavy weights in ancient Egypt. They didn't have the wheel at that very early date. Yes, the later Egyptians had the chariots and what have you, but I don't think we have any evidence of them having anything other than sleds back in ancient history. We haven't got anything that's axles, so we don't have anything which leads on to pulleys and rope technology, which we'll talk about in the next one. But I want to get the conversation continuing today, and I want to look at like real basics of like what we know about how humans do heavy jobs. I've got one last thing for you that came to me when I was doing this job the other day. Look at these pieces of wood. This is softwood that's been cut down from these white pines and balsam firs that are mostly in this forest. A bit of hackmatack and stuff, but there's some basic softwood in this forest. This is not heavy wood. This is not hardwood. It can't take huge loads. In this little section here, you can see I've decided to cut them up into this kind of amount. This is because I use my truck here to move wood from trees. At the moment, mostly on like clearing the ground, as I said, but later on there'll be a couple trees that come down, and I want to have like a bit of a process for how I do things, although I'm a rank amateur. But I want to have a process so I'm not wasting my time. I might be an amateur in this particular skill area, but I do other jobs where I have to move a lot of people around on board boat and get supplies and stores and sails and everything else moved around and put in a position before we even leave port. And then when we go to sea, obviously we've got the whole of the ship to work. So I know that we have to have a bit of a process, and what my process is to drop the tree in limit here, put its limbs into the hedges that make up all of these funny shapes here, leaving me with something like this, and then that goes up into here. And this avalanche is 5 foot on the bed and 3 foot with the tail down. So I want to take this then, and I normally cut the logs in position here, choppy, down at the actual wood store, and then split them there and straight into the wood store itself. So I've got the sawdust as a resource, I've got the split wood obviously as a resource, and it all happens in one place. Great, no problem. What's important here? This length of wood, if I put it in the back of the truck, this is a waste of space going in here because there's still 4 foot left over. The 8 foot hangs out and is super efficient, but by the time it's 8 foot, it's getting to a point that I can't lift and move it on my own. If a boss in a work gang said to me, hey Chris, go and get that piece of wood, I'm gonna be slow and useless. The best length is about 6 foot here. Okay, obviously I'm filming with one hand, so it's gonna be hard to do anything else with the other hand. It's just gonna come up. Oh, I need my gloves on. Okay, look, even single-handed, I can pop a little 6 foot up, and I guess cleaned off, that is the kind of diameter you'd be looking at for moving a stone if you're going to push it long distances, not on a sled, but with people like rolling it along. A 6 foot length is about what a person can lift up. If we start to get into long poles, firstly, where are they coming from? Ancient Egypt, you'd have like date palms and very little else that's a rigorous, tough tree that's going to allow you to put huge weight on it. In terms of moving them, once they get beyond 6 foot, it's a 2-person or 3-person or 4-person job. Having to work with 40-foot spinnaker poles on the boats that I work on, people get very confused very quickly. You have to train a team of 4 to lift up a carbon fiber spinnaker pole, which only weighs like 30 pounds maximum. You got to train them carefully before they can move around on a ship. With sandals, on sand, with something that weighs, by the time this 8 foot here, what's that going to be, 100 pounds? By the time it's any longer than that, we're 120, 140, 150 pounds. People getting their feet injured by not communicating clearly, having no education, having very minimal problem-solving abilities, we think, compared to some of the techniques we'd have available today. Each individual pole would have to have somebody organizing the work group that moves the pole. If the pole is 6 foot long, the person leading the work group can say, hey, go and get a pole, bring it over here. So 6 foot is like a natural amount that I think is useful, and once you get beyond that, you have to have work teams on each pole, and the movement of each pole, each roller, is very complex. The storage of them, the movement of them from place to place gets very complex. So rolling things on pieces of wood, we need to look at the logistics of how that could happen and what extra pressure it would put onto a big construction just to organize people to move them around. 6 foot, easy days, no problem at all, can pop it in there. 8 foot, getting heavy. It fits in the truck, but it's getting heavy for me. It'd be getting heavy for anybody at any time in history. So I think that we need to continue this conversation looking at what's the real realities of everyday moving heavy rocks. And in the next one, I've got some wonderful footage of some guys, I think it's in India, where lifting very heavy rocks is a sport, and we can start to see like what a human can lift and move. And I want to look at the trials and tribulations that would be on someone's everyday life if they're involved day after day, month, year, building something like the pyramids. Like, you're going to be wearing through people very, very fast. You better have millions of people to have tens of thousands of people working on that thing if you're going to be running them that hard, because you're going to have to keep running that hard for 27 years or more. We need to discuss this. So let's not pick up our rock yet. Let's try and learn everything about it, and then we can start to get some basics in. If a work group came to a stone in Egypt 5,000 years ago, a 5-ton stone, what are they looking at? What are they thinking of? What resources have they got available? What's going on in their heads? And then we might have a glimmer of an idea as to what was the method they used for doing this, because clearly they did it. All right. Thanks very much for your comments last time. Comments in the section below. If you're going to comment, put in what makes you qualified to have a comment here, because there is a hierarchy in this. I have a lot of experience of lifting heavy weights personally myself. I have a lot of experience of like rigging loads, but I don't know anything about foundations on buildings. I don't know anything about lifting heavy stones or heavy shift loading or really health and safety or anything like that. Like, we can get our knowledge together in these comments, and we can start to create everything around the situation and the subject apart from the exact technique. And I think once we've done all that detective work, we'll then have a better idea of what that technique could possibly have been. These guys 50, 60 years ago here in Nova Scotia were still using the same techniques as the people that built those foundations 200 years ago, and those people were using the same techniques as people 5,000 years ago for smaller rocks. So let's build on that, build on what we know, and hopefully we can answer this age-old question of how did they do this stuff. Like and subscribe. Speak to you soon. Cheers.